here is to kind of expand these limits of flexibility, not expand up to the Nazi official, which is my position right now, but even then, when I wrote the book, I was trying to say that it's not only the golden rule that fits the picture that I am proposing, but also the most representative alternatives to Kant's ethics can be bought into this account of autonomy and of human worth as dependent on autonomy. So, this departure from Kantian orthodoxy may still appear insufficient to many contemporary theoreticians of human rights. If we let human dignity depend on a capacity of detachment from our senses inclinations, that is, if we remain within a deontological approach, no matter how liberalized in its overarching formula, the impression is that there is no hope that our foundation could be favorably received by approaches to morality traditionally opposed to deontology, such as utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and moral sentimentalism. That is human. If there is no possible overlap, at least with the major Western schools of ethical thought, what concrete chance do we have to buy in non-Western approaches? While we deal with the second part of the problem at the end of this chapter, which we'll not cover here because it's too long and complicated, we can say the following about the first. Okay, so now here is my attempt to take care of utilitarianism, Aristotle, and Hume in a couple of pages. Regarding utilitarianism, let's keep in mind that the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people is a principle that as impartial and disinterested as the categorical imperative or the golden rule. Perhaps even more than the latter. I do think it's more impartial than the latter. For an agent to act on the utility principle, the adoption of the rule requires pretty much the same ability to take distance from his or her own interests and inclinations, because what promotes the greatest happiness for most people may very well contrast with the interest of the individual. Moreover, if the greatest happiness of a community is promoted by the fact that they have to destroy your house and displace you somewhere else because that's where a highway has to be built, the utilitarian would say, my friend, your house has to go. If you are a utilitarian, you want to be coherent, you have to accept these consequences, which is a substantial sacrifice. Without going to the usual example of if we discover that the utility of a society is maximized by putting 20% of the population in slavery, then we have to accept slavery. But you see how it goes. So, moreover, I would say, besides this point, utilitarian needs to explain why pleasures and displeasures of human beings count anything unless some reasons to care for such beings are given or taken for granted. So here I'm saying utilitarians are keen on pleasures. I use the famous Bentham's principle. The king and queen of human life are pleasure and displeasure, basically. Everything we do can be explained by our attempt to pursue pleasure and to avoid pain. Now, I think that even Bentham needs to explain why pleasures and displeasures of human beings count anything unless some reason to care for such beings are given or taken for granted. Of course, the utilitarian sees in the capacity of suffering, not in the capacity of acting morally, the main ground to identify entities that deserves to be protected by morality and rights. That's why Peter Singer thinks that we are speciesists, because we share with animals the capacity to suffer, and that's what counts, right? But since the capacity is clearly not a prerogative of humans, a moderate utilitarian, that is, one who acknowledges some difference in worth between, so not Singer, but a moderate utilitarian, that is, one who acknowledges some difference in worth between humans and animals, still needs a reason to ground humans' special treatment, and still needs to find a criterion to explain why humans are entitled to a special protection compared to other animals. And our suggestion that a comparatively superior capacity to choose our sacrifices, so to speak, could be an answer to this question. Obviously, there is no guarantee that moderate utilitarians would look at that specific capacity, in explaining why they also have a special treatment for human beings, despite the fact that we share the capacity of suffering with all the animal world, certainly with other mammals. In explaining this fact, he has to tell us what's so special about human beings, and there is no, of course, it's not necessarily the case that the moderate utilitarian is going to point, like we do, to autonomy as the extra that justifies the special treatment that we reserve to human animals. But the fact that they could, without prejudice to their general commitments to the utility principle, at least show that there is no incompatibility between a broadly construed utilitarian approach and our foundation. So I'm saying, if the utilitarian accepts this burden of proving on what grounds he thinks that morality should assign to human animals a special protection, then on the one hand, we have no guarantee that he's going to look at autonomy, our autonomy, as what explains this difference. But on the other hand, I think that this shows that an appeal to the utility principle, so maximizing the utility of society, is not intrinsically incompatible with our appeal to autonomy as the ultimate ground of our worth. So, all I'm trying to do is to say that utilitarians, if they want to do so, can buy into this account that looks at the relationship between dignity and autonomy. Things are a little bit more complicated with utilitarian approaches a la Peter Singer, that advocate an equal consideration for all animals. For Singer and others, famously, what counts for defining those entities, those entitled to an equal consideration of interest, is explicitly not the capacity for reasons, no matter whether understood in the sense of autonomy or in a competing manner, but merely the capacity for suffering. So all that counts now is the capacity of suffering. Not accidentally, often, for these philosophers, the very talk of human rights amounts to nonsense. Two considerations, however, are relevant here. To begin with, the skeptic, the skeptic, a foundation of human rights is addressed to, is usually someone who does not deny that humans are entitled to more consideration than animals. So what we are trying to do usually when we propose a foundation of human rights is to convince not Peter Singer, but someone who believes that humans are different than other species and more important and more entitled to protection, but doesn't see exactly why all human beings should be protected in the same way. So the skeptic we target usually is not Singer. Secondly, even if our foundation won't convince extreme defenders of animal rights, probably an ambition that is too high for any foundation, Our recognizing bits of moral life in the animal world, our second point of departure from Kant, goes precisely in the direction Singer at times alludes to. For example, Singer concedes that in many circumstances, mainly in virtue of the capacity for self-awareness, which is close enough to reason and ultimately to autonomy, human beings can suffer more than animals, and it entitles them to a protection different than that deserved by mice and other mammals. Granted, we do not claim that it is the superior ability to suffer, but our superior ability to dignify ourselves with moral choices that makes us more worthy than animals. But the structure of the argument is similar. In both cases, prerogatives, rights, and entitlement to moral concern are seen as proportional to the possession of different capacities, or of the same capacity at different degrees. In the end, all utilitarians a la Singer need to accept of our foundation. All utilitarians a la Singer need to accept of our foundation is the idea that our peculiar capacity for moral behavior, our autonomy, whose reality a utilitarian is not committed to reject in light of his other beliefs, makes some difference in the diversified application of the equal consideration principle, in addition to, not instead of, the other capacities utilitarians usually appeal to. So, even in the extreme case of Peter Singer, I think that there is room for saying, on the one hand, that his emphasis on the capacity for suffering as the sole source of moral consideration, the only reason why we should give moral consideration to those who are capable of suffering, is not ipso facto incompatible with saying that there may be other capacities that are relevant, at least because they influence our capacity for suffering. So his idea that we are entitled, may be more entitled than animals to rights because our self-awareness increases our ability to suffer, goes in the direction of suggesting other faculties, other capacities that may become relevant in this application, this attribution of rights. Yes?
Sorry, just a question.
Sure.
Perhaps a stupid one. How it is possible to mess the suffering and the capacity to measure the capacity of suffering?
Ask the utilitarians. Why do you ask me? No, that's a classical problem. For utilitarians.
It's obviously absurd.
Well, I mean,
No, because you can see the thing from other point of view. That is, because the man had the possibility to justify and to know the ground of his suffering, he do not suffer so much as a child, a little child, or animals, because they don't know what happened, and they suffer more for little thing than adult and rational, complete adult rational being.
Yeah.
And I think that is an argument against this.
Against Singer's proportionality between self-awareness and amount of suffering. No, I mean, I may agree, I don't have an opinion about that. I certainly see the problems that utilitarians usually have of measuring pleasures and pains, of course, and besides measuring for everybody. So it's a calculation quite difficult to do. So I agree with you that utilitarians have this kind of problem, and I also may agree with you that it's not self-evident that self-awareness increases our capacity for suffering, it may decrease it. But all I'm trying to say here is that utilitarians need to give us an answer. I mean, moderate utilitarians need to give us an answer of why, despite the fact that suffering is all that matters from a moral point of view, they still want to say human beings need to be treated better than animals. So they owe us an answer. We Kantians have an answer. But if you are a moderate utilitarian, you have to tell us why. We are more capable of suffering. I mean, be our guest, but tell us something. Okay. Extreme utilitarians, a la Peter Singer, may simply reject this approach because they think if you focus on human dignity, if you ground human dignity on autonomy, autonomy is really nothing that moves me because all that matters, the only thing that matters is the capacity of suffering for suffering. So I'm not saying that humans in principle are more entitled to rights than animals because we all suffer. We know that from science that mammals suffer pretty much in the same way. The part of our nervous system that takes care of suffering is very similar to that of cats, dogs, cows, and so on. So why? Okay. At one point I may say, but fine. As I said at the beginning, I'm not trying to convince Peter Singer. Usually the skeptic that the foundation of human rights targets is someone who say, no, this part of humanity is entitled to a certain kind of respect, and this other part of humanity to a lower kind of respect. So it's really usually a skeptic that remains in the what Peter Singer would call speciesism, that is in this anthropocentric, self-indulging attribution of a special place in the universe. So I thought it would make sense to notice that he makes self-awareness as something similar for the amount of rights that you receive, but perhaps on the basis of empirical principle, on the basis of empirical claims that are not so solid.
I saw research maybe some months ago about this, and the research was saying, the people were saying that animals don't suffer like us because they don't have the third kind of conscience that we have.
Third conscious.
Yes. Like
what is the
self-awareness? It's the same thing that Peter Singer is saying here. But I share the intuition because it doesn't say nothing at all. Maybe the sheer capacity of self-awareness slow the pain that we feel because we understand why we are suffering. And animals don't understand nothing at all about this. So I think that it's just speculation, pure speculation, something like this, to say that just because an animal doesn't have self-awareness, he suffers less than a human being.
Okay. Let me finish this very cursory, quick, and therefore superficial treatment of other moral schools, and then we take a break. Okay, so utilitarianism, no matter how difficult it looks at the beginning, because what is the most distant moral school to Kant? Utilitarianism. But, utilitarianism and Kant's theory shared the idea that ultimately morality has to do with universal principle. So in the end may not be that difficult of a case. Its major point of friction with the ontology is not the view of human nature and its worth, probably, at least moderate universalism, but the aggregate nature of the theory, the lack of consideration, as Rawls would say, for the separateness of persons. And nothing in our foundation is incompatible with the intuition that all things being equal, it may be permissible to sacrifice the human rights of few for protecting the human rights of many, if necessary. So that may be a third point of departure from Kant, but honestly I don't think so. It's a departure from a very simple-minded interpretation of Kant's ethics. So, you know, one of the criticisms that people, Ross traditionally made of Kant is that if the certain moral obligations are absolute, as Kant seems to argue, then we end up in the rather strange condition of the German Supreme Court, that in the aftermath of September 11th, so after the attack at the Twin Towers, was called to say whether a law passed by the German parliament was constitutional or not. The law was a law that allowed German Air Force to strike down civic planes with civilians in the case in which they were hijacked. So the law gave the permission to the German Air Force to prevent an attack like the one against the Twin Towers on German soil. So what is the moral problem there? Of course, that you kill civilians, that you kill the civilians who are on that plane. And the Constitutional Court said that it was not permissible. And I think that they even made an explicit reference to Kant to justify this, because you cannot use the civilians that are in that airplane as means for the ends of other human beings, so whose life you are trying to prevent. I'm not impressed by this argument, honestly, because this idea that you are using these civilians as means is really ill-conceived. What you are really facing there, and maybe that's my utilitarian side, what you are really facing is the comparison between situation A, in which you have that these civilians will die anyway, because if they have been hijacked by terrorists, they will die, because if the terrorists will reach their goal, it's not that they save their lives. And another situation B, in which the situation A is that the civilians in the airplane die, and die also the civilians that are the target of the attack. And situation 2, that only the civilians who are on that plane die. So, I mean, I think that even Kant would say that it is obligatory, not permissible, obligatory to go for striking down that airplane, because you are not using one as a mean to the other one, but you are really comparing a number of people who have the same rights, and therefore if there is a consideration of more people having their rights violated, this is something that Kant would say you have to go for it. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because if you believe that the quintessential element of utilitarianism is this aggregative nature, so you have to add a consideration for individuals, and all individuals are equal, they count as equal, and you have moral results by adding the interest of different persons. If you move from the notion of the interest of each individual to the rights of each individual, this aggregative nature is present also in Kant, or at least there is room to believe that nothing prevents Kant from saying that you can compare the number of rights that are being violated and go for the least bad situation. Okay, so all this to say that utilitarianism is closer to Kant's ethics as it may appear at first sight. But certainly more difficult cases seem to be, on the one hand, Aristotle, on the other hand, Hume, so virtue ethics and sentimentalism, because the rejection of autonomy, understood in the way here suggested, seems to be required by the idea, common and central to both approaches, that emotions and feelings are not an obstacle, but constitutive, or at least a significant part of the motivational background of any moral action. So for Aristotle and Hume, it's not the case that you are moral when you silence your inclination or passions, or at least you have to be able to do so. It's rather the case that you can be moral only if you have the right passions motivating you in that specific circumstances. That's not exactly true, because there is the difference between the virtuous person and the moral person and the morally strong person in Aristotle, you know. If you're not familiar with the distinction, I'm going to tell you because it's a nice one anyway. So the virtuous person is the one who does the right thing, having the emotional side of himself or herself pushing toward doing the right things. The strongly moral person is at a lower level in moral development, because he still does the right thing, but with his inclination going in the opposite directions. And often this is taken to show the difference between Aristotle and Kant, because it looks like that the Kantian hero is the strongly more moral person, whereas the Aristotelian hero is the virtuous person. I think it is itself wrong, but because I don't think that the Kantian hero is necessarily the morally strong person. And I think that when Kant says we have to visit hospitals, we have to see people who are suffering, we have to make the experience of other people suffering in order to be in a better condition to be moral, he is saying something quite similar to Aristotle. That is, that we need to train our passions, not because our passions are going to be our motivating element in deciding how to act, but because we don't want to have our passions go in the opposite direction of the moral law, become an obstacle to moral law. So we have to train ourselves into be virtuous person, like Aristotle said. The only real difference there is that Aristotle doesn't say that ultimately it's reason that has to make the final call, like Kant does, but Kant explicitly says that you have to train your passions in such a way that when reason is called to make the final decision about what you are going to do, you don't have your emotional side pushing you exactly in the opposite direction. You want to have emotions on your side, and that's good. So it's not true that the strongly moral person is the Kantian hero. I think it's the virtuous person, understood differently, that is the hero, both of Kant and Aristotle. Okay, so I don't know why I went along with this distinction, but yes.
When you was explaining about your point of view, your way of thinking about the foundation of the morality, I have the impression that your way to conceive the morality puts some Kantian thoughts more closer to a subjective way of thinking, and it makes rooms to conceive a plurality of morals and accept them together in some way, to think the human rights, but as you were explaining, I thought that it was more more closer to Aristotle, because you can think in different moments and different places, the possibility of different morals.
Well, I don't think that I agree with the reading of Aristotle that you are suggesting. I mean, it is one thing to say that for Aristotle you cannot have an overarching general principle that explains morality and that can be applied in all circumstances, like Kant does. But this is not to say that morality changes according to the circumstances. It's just that you don't have a general principle that encompasses the complexity of the moral response that you need to have according to the different moral circumstances that you face. So, I don't think that Aristotle's morality is subjectivist.
No,
right?
I'm not talking at it was subjective, but Aristotle would think that someone could be moral, acting as someone that was virtuous, in different places and putting acting through some principles, but things change in different places. People need to adapt to those places. That's all I'm talking.
Okay.
There are principles, but the circumstances make people need to be trained and work differently.
Right.
So it's not subjective, but the circumstances ask different
Answers, moral answers. Yeah,
Cultural.
but still, okay. Once again, the different of the circumstances. You first said there are principles, but these, and it seemed you were saying, according to the circumstances, the principles may change. My position on Aristotle's ethics is that there are no principle whatsoever, because virtues is what the virtuous person does, period. So it's not that you can have a rule and you go and you ask the virtuous person, can you explain to me what is virtue? Give me a fucking, list of points in which you say, if you have to do this, and then you are virtuous. No, it doesn't work like that. Because you cannot have a theory of virtue. Virtue is something that has done in practice. You understand that this was the right answer when you see it, and the virtuous person is the one that has judgment, that has practical wisdom, that has phronesis, that leads you to give the right answer, not reason. So it's something between reason, experience, and so on and so on.
You need to be between the extremes. It's not that
Exactly.
you need to have
But the
principles,
extreme, right, you have to be in between the extreme, but you do not know beforehand what is the golden mean, right? So it's only the virtuous person who, by acting virtuously, show you that that was the golden mean. But you don't know it beforehand, okay? So that's why I don't think that it's an ethics based on principles, on rules, okay? So, but at the same time, it's not a subjectivist principle, as you know, because there is only one right answer in each circumstance, and there is one golden mean, not many, according to, I think it this way, you think it that way, the culture leads me to think that way. No, I mean, it's as universalistic as Kant in this, right? Maybe he thought that ethics does not apply to barbarians, as he called the non-Greeks, but among Greeks at least, I mean, it has to be universal. So is my flexibility about the content of the moral law reminiscent of Aristotle in this? I don't know. It is to the extent in which you say that the virtuous person, even if he or she has his or her emotions on his or her side when he does the virtuous thing, is still an autonomous agent. So I'm closer to Aristotle to the extent in which Aristotle has nothing to say against the idea that, and in fact I think that he has to admit the idea that human beings are autonomous, because otherwise it would be very hard to make sense of moral progress. You need to be, if you want to move, for example, from the position of the morally strong to the position of the virtuous, which is an improvement obviously, well, this means that there must be an autonomous decision at one point in your life to start training your passions in such a way that they are no longer an obstacle to your moral life. So I think that Aristotle must admit that people are free at one point to make a big decision and say, okay, I want to become a virtuous person. So I want to train my passions. I want to stop being subject, at least to this contrast between what I do, what is right to do, and what my emotion lead me towards. So in this sense it is. I don't know whether it is also closer to Aristotle in the sense that, for me it doesn't matter so much the content of the moral law that you are applying, it matters the ability to act on principles. I mean, I think Aristotle would not like that much, because he would say, are you sure? I mean, so you are saying that also the morally weak? No. So you are saying that also someone who gives the wrong answer, the wrong moral response to a certain circumstance, is displaying worth simply because this response, no matter how wrong, was against his or her interest. I don't think that Aristotle would like that very much, right? So that's why I was resisting the suggestion that I can take Aristotle on my side. Well, let's see quickly what I want to say about if you're not too tired, otherwise we stop. What do you want to do? No, seriously, I'm not a fan. Do you want to take a break now? And come back? Yeah, let's take a break now and we come back in after. I'm on my trip.